And her name, to this day, I will never forget. Her name was Aski. And I think she was like 7 or 8. And her mother took a frying pan and brained her with it. She was leaking so much fluid that somebody had lifted her up and put a trash bag under her to like catch the fluid. And they just left her there for 3 days. I was born in Edwards Air Force Base, California. My father was in the military, in the Air Force. Before I was born, my family lived like all over the place. And well, even after I was born, we moved a lot. But I was the 4th out of 5 kids. And after Edwards, I think we were in El Cajon, maybe, somewhere in San Diego. And then we moved to Japan when I was, I think, 3 years old. And that was really amazing and cool. I would love to go back to Japan. We lived on an Air Force base, obviously, which was essentially America. Everybody spoke English. You know, we're Americans on the base, but sometimes we went off the base into Japan, and it was like going to another planet because nobody spoke English. And there was all this amazing, weird, cool stuff. Like the bus drivers would give out presents, like these little boxes with like orange and chocolate. For some reason, that was like a huge thing in Japan, oranges with chocolate. I still remember that. And yeah, just little things like that, and how they would wrap every little thing, like, you know, an ecologist's worst nightmare. But like presentation is like a huge thing over there. But my father is half Japanese, so we knew certain things because like he would like mix in Japanese words and stuff. But I must have been like at least 30 when she told me this story. But we were living in Japan, and she found a letter in my father's belongings, and it was for her. And she opened it, and it was like years old, but someone in the Philippines had written to my mother and told her that her mother had died. And my father never told her. He just kept the letter, which is not, I mean, my father was an alcoholic, and he was just a selfish, I don't want to cuss, just a selfish alcoholic person who I was never close to. And when I was 6 years old, I won, and I'm not saying like I was a great artist. I just happened to win a Exxon art contest. And I was supposed to go get my trophy. And I was standing in the front yard waiting for my dad to come. And I remember my mother coming out of the house, and she was like, "Your dad is drunk in a bar. He's not coming." And I was like, I was so outraged, you know, but like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, I finally win something in my life, and like, I don't even get to go get it. So I was like, I remember like being enraged. Like there was like this rage in me, but I was just, you know, a 6-year-old kid. And I made a vow to myself there. And I still remember it vividly. I was like, I will never drink in my whole life. 10 years of being a 911 operator, where I started to pray to God to destroy the world. Like, you talk to so many people, and you hear about like so many kids that, you know, just horrible crimes I don't even want to talk about. But I was at the point where I was like, you know what, God, if we're not doing this stuff, all this evil stuff that happens all the time, we're letting it happen. You know, like how can we let this happen and not, you know, put a stop to it? Why does this keep going on? And I was like, yeah, just destroy the world already. Like, just start over. I did feel like I was making a difference because, for instance, I talked to a lot of suicidal people. Like, people want to kill themselves, you know, not all of them, obviously, but they would call 911. And I would tell them what happened to me. I would be like, I don't know exactly what you're going through right now, but I do know what it's like to want to kill yourself. Of course I would tell them. Of course I would share my story. Like, you can't kill yourself because Jesus is real. You know, Jesus loves you so much, and I am not lying to you, but this happened to me when I was 14. And I would tell them. And it was my job, obviously, to keep them talking until the cops get there and, you know, take them to the psychiatric ward. But this is what I prayed for. You know, I told God I wanted to help people. And I didn't want to end up one day, you know, sometimes I do feel stupid telling my story, even though like it's real and true and everything. and I want to share it with people, but I know how weird it sounds. I know how crazy it sounds. However, one day I'm going to be standing in front of Jesus, and I don't want him to say, how come you didn't tell anybody, April? Like, I actually came to see you, right? We get a call, and it is the aunt who shows up at the residence of this kid. And her name, to this day, I will never forget. Her name was Askey, Askey. And I think she was like 7 or 8, probably 8. And what had happened, the aunt walked in and called 911 because the family, this had been going on for 3 days before the aunt showed up and reported it. But Askey, well, I don't even know what she did, but it doesn't even matter because there's just no excuse for this. But anyway, she made her mother angry, and her mother took a frying pan and brained her with it, like hit her so hard that she cracked her skull. And Askey fell to the floor with her skull fractured, and for 3 days, she was leaking spinal fluid on the kitchen. And her family, including her mother, obviously, they were just walking over her. When the call came in, we didn't know all of this, but this is the officers get out there because it was the kid on the floor, and they get out there and they do the investigation, and it turned out the mother hit her with a frying pan. The family, nobody called until the aunt who didn't live there called, but they were just walking over her. And I remember she was leaking so much fluid that somebody had lifted her up and put a trash bag under her to like catch the fluid, and they just left her there for 3 days. Like, can you just even imagine that? Like laying somewhere for 3 days while your spinal fluid is leaking out and your family is walking over you. Like, I could not stop thinking about that. Like the hate inside me, like, and I knew, like, because they used to make me go on ride-alongs and stuff for like officer safety, like but if I was an officer responding to something like that, I probably would like shoot the mother, like, how do you control yourself when it was all sorts of horrible. But I remember like cops and firemen and paramedics and who had responded to this, like they were wrecked, like crying. Because, like, they kept visiting this kid because, like, she didn't have anybody. All she had was her family who let this happen to her. But,
She didn't die.
No, she never, well, as far as I know, she didn't die. But I remember one of my coworkers had been a nurse, and she was an ER nurse. And she went to the hospital all the time. A lot of people did. Like, a lot of dispatchers went. I didn't go because I knew I couldn't look at something like that. I mean, it's horrible enough having to hear about it, but I didn't want to look at it. But she went to the hospital to visit the girl who was like, oh my God. Like, she told us, when she came back, she told us, that my coworker, she said, like, that girl is going to be institutionalized for the rest of her life. Like, she will never talk again. She will never function. Like, she might as well be dead, basically. Like, she was just, I guess vegetative is, I don't know if that's even the right term anymore, but she was describing how her wound had necrotized, like, they had to, like, cut away the flesh that was, like, dead, and, it was, like, it was so horrible, and, yeah, and I wasn't there. I didn't witness any of this, but that was part of the reason why, like, I started to, like, hate people. Like, I felt like you're either stupid or you're evil. Because, like, that's pretty much what my life was. Like, everybody I talked to was either a complete moron or evil. You're one or the other. It was like lunchtime on a Tuesday, which was like parking problems, right? People call the police for, like, the bloodlust doesn't start till about 3, when everybody, has had lunch and whatever. So it was like really quiet in the comm center. But suddenly every phone, every line lit up, just like Christmas. And it turned out there used to be a mall in downtown Long Beach, and all the phone calls were coming from the mall. And I remember I was on radio, so I wasn't answering the calls. It was the operators, and then they would put the call through, and I had to like dispatch the officers. But I was like, oh, we would have like, I remember the refinery blew up once, and then all the lines lit up. When Reginald Denny was beaten in Los Angeles, people in Long Beach were calling 911 because they were watching it on TV, and we were like, "Where's the emergency?" And they're like, "Oh, it's in, it's on Sepulveda or whatever." Well, that's not even Long Beach. They're watching TV and reporting a crime they're watching in Los Angeles. But stuff like that would have this effect. But it was a mall this time, and everybody was calling, and this was before cell phones, but every caller was like, "Oh, I heard gunshots. I think I heard 2 gunshots," and since it would just echo through the mall, nobody knew, where it was coming from or whatever. But so I sent officers out there, and it turned out when, the officers get there and they tell you what's actually happening, you think, oh, it's a robbery. Somebody's, robbing the mall. But it was the manager of the Sbarro, which is like a pizza place. Her estranged husband came to talk to her. So this was in the food court. So she took her break and she walked out to meet him, and he pulled this machete out and he beheaded her with this machete right in front of Hot Dog on a Stick. That's what happened. So they were getting divorced. He wasn't having it. So cut her head off with a giant machete. And then the gunshots were he pulled his gun out and he shot himself twice in the head, which was another thing. Like, how do you shoot yourself twice in the head, right? Isn't it just once? But anyway, there was 2 gunshots. He killed himself. And that's what the call was. And I could not stop thinking about this for months. And it wasn't even, yes, that's a horrible way to go, but it's fast, right? If someone beheads you, you pretty much die instantly, right? Yeah, that's sensational and horrible and awful. But I could not stop thinking about the witnesses, because it was lunchtime and the mall was full, and I was like, and I used to go to that mall. I worked at that mall when I was a teenager. But imagine that. Like, you go on your break and you go get your hot dog on a stick and your lemonade, and then suddenly there's this bloody head at your feet. How do you live your life after that? Like, what, can you ever go to a fair again? What happens if you see a corn dog again? Like, how do you, I just couldn't stop thinking about it. Just the witnesses that saw something like that. But that actually happened. I think it was like 1996-ish. Eddie calls. No. I'll tell you, they used to send me on neighborhood watch meetings. Have you ever been to a neighborhood watch meeting? Yeah. Okay. So they would pay me overtime, for a couple hours to go talk to the citizens. And I would explain to them how 911 works and, what to call 911 for and all this stuff. But I did a few years on Graveyard. And most of Graveyard, after 2 o'clock, is just nothing. And you just have to focus on staying awake because your body wants to fall asleep, So we would play volleyball and watch Nick at Night and, the Dick Van Dyke Show or whatever. But anyway, so 3 o'clock in the morning one night, this guy calls, and he lives in one of the high-rises on Ocean Boulevard, which is right on the beach. Thousands of people live in those buildings. They're like huge buildings. And he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry to call 911, but this is just so weird." And I was like, "It's okay. Don't worry about it. Just tell me what's happening. We'll send someone out there to check it out." And he was like, "I feel so stupid calling, because I can't really see anything. I just see shadows." And I was like, "Okay, so tell me what you see." And he's like, "I got up to pee, and I just happened to glance out the window." And he's like 20 stories up, by the way. And he's like, "I look down on the beach, and it looks like," and he's like, "I know it's not this, but this is what it looks like. It looks like a guy dragging a body rolled up in a rug towards the water." And he's like, "I know that's not what it is, but it's just weird anybody being on the beach at this hour, right?" And I was like, "Okay, don't worry about it." And one of the things we always have to ask when we take calls is, do you want to be contacted? Because some people really want to talk to the police. Most people don't. Like, no, I don't want anything to do with it. I'm anonymous, Mr. Anonymous. And that's what this guy was. He's like, no, I'm going back to sleep. I just think it's weird. There's a guy down on the beach, and I had to call. And I was like, don't worry about it. So, and I wiped all his information out. Because, like, when you call 911, back then anyway, I don't know what it's like now, but all your information would pop up automatically. Your address, your apartment number, your phone number, not your name. Your name didn't pop up.
You have to wipe it out?
Usually no, okay. But if he's like, I don't want to be contacted, I'm going back to bed, don't contact me. Okay. I take all the information out except for the location. Mm-hmm. I took his apartment number out and whatever. I was like, don't worry about it. That's what we're here for, We'll send an officer out. So I put the call in. The caller says it looks like a guy dragging a body wrapped up in a carpet towards the water. He knows that's not what it is, but he's going back to sleep. Don't contact him. So I put the call in. Again, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's almost no officers working because, the world's asleep. And the helicopter comes on and is like, I'll check it out. And our police helicopter had forward-looking infrared, which you probably know what that is. You're a photographer, right? It's basically anything that has a little bit of heat just glows. It's like green. So the helicopter can, that's why... Night vision, yeah. But it's called FLIR. That's what we called it. So the helicopter flew over, and the only unit that we had that can actually drive on the beach was the K9 unit, because they had like the 4-wheel drive in the SUVs. The rest, like a regular police unit, can't drive on the sand. And the K9 was way out west, or way out east, so it took a while for him to get there. But the helicopter flew over, and he's like, yep, there's a guy down there, and yep, it looks like he's dragging a body wrapped up in a carpet. But the helicopter is, they can only see, they can't see the actual guy. They just see, like, the shadow or the heat signature. So the K9 unit finally shows up, and the phone rings again. I was not the dispatcher. I was the operator. And I pick up the phone, and it's the same guy. I still remember his name. His name was Gary. And he was like, April. I had told him my name. He's like, what's going on down there? I was like, what are you talking about? And he's like, there's like 50 cops on the beach. And I was like, looking through the call. I was like, oh, guess what? It was a guy who had just killed his girlfriend and wrapped her up in a carpet and was dragging her to the water to get rid of her body. And I was like, you're the only guy that called me, Gary. All the thousands of people that live where you live, you're the only person that called me, and you were apologizing to me for calling me. So this is the story I always told when I did 911, or not 911, neighborhood watch meetings. I always told this story because you don't know what it is. Even though you don't know the whole story, if something, you live there, you know what's odd, you know what stands out, call us. That's what we're here for. It doesn't have to be something on fire. It doesn't have to be an emergency. If it just looks weird, call us. At least we'll send an officer to drive by and check it out. But that guy would have gotten away with murder if you had not called me. And he was like, whoa, I don't believe it. And I'm like, and every time I would get sent to meetings, I would always tell that. I still tell that story to people. People that, I'm not going to call the police. You should call, because it's better that it's nothing and an officer checks it out than somebody gets away with murder. So... true story. Oh my God. Did you ever watch that show, what was it called? America's Most Wanted? Well, there was a show, and they would, do stories about all these, wanted felons. They killed 13 women and blah, 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 blah. And sometimes we'd get calls from citizens like, oh my God, I just saw the guy from America's Most Wanted. He's standing by the liquor store, smoking a cigarette. And you're just like, oh, sure. Of course it's that guy, right? Whatever. And half the time it was it was the guy that they saw on TV on America's Most Wanted. So you're always like, so yeah, it could be. You never know. Could be the guy, and they've caught a lot of guys that way. So thank God you put the call through. Were you here when the riots hit? Do you remember the riots? It was 1992. I had just bought my car, a brand new Honda, and it was, what's his name? The guy he was like a crackhead, and the police were filmed beating him. What was his name? The jury acquitted the officers, and then they started rioting in Los Angeles. And this is what I told you. Reginald Denny was an innocent truck driver, and he was in the middle of an intersection, and a bunch of thugs pulled him out and started beating on him because they were mad that the jury acquitted the officers.
You got the call?
I'm sorry?
You got the call?
No. Okay. What happened, that was day one, but people in Long Beach were watching TV and watching this happen in Los Angeles, and they were freaking out, and they were calling 911 in Long Beach. So on day one, we're answering the phone, Long Beach 911, what are you reporting? And they're describing something that they're watching on TV, and we're like, you were in Long Beach. This is Long Beach. We can't handle Los Angeles. And the LAPD knows what's happening. So, why are you calling? You get people doing stuff. When you panic, you don't think, right? So, anyway, nothing was happening in Long Beach on the first day. However, people in Long Beach were watching TV and watching all the looting happening and people getting free TVs in Los Angeles. So the next day, they started looting in Long Beach, even though they didn't care about the police beating or the verdict. They just wanted a free TV. So in Long Beach, on the second day, all that stuff started to happen. And the commander came down to the comm center, and he was like, nobody's going home. We're staying here until, and really, I didn't want to leave because it sounded like the world was ending, we had 4 officers per unit. We stopped dispatching regular calls, parking problems and, neighbor disputes and all that stuff. All I cared about was the rioting. So every police unit had 4 cars, and they're like, everybody's here until further notice. And it just was like Armageddon. Of course, I was sitting in a basement and I couldn't see everything that was happening. But we were there for a long time. The phones never stopped ringing. It was just chaos. There's a fire here, and, these people are, tearing this building down. And, it was just never ending. Just call after call after call. And people reporting, multiple people reporting the same incident. And, just this stuff happening all over the city. It just was like
out of control.
Chaos, like a nightmare. And when they finally let us go home, I think it was 4 or 5 in the morning. And they were like, okay, this is what's going to happen. We're going to basically do a caravan. So the police were going to escort each of us home, and we're just all in this train, and we would just drive by everybody's house, and then until everybody went home. And I thought when we walked out, because we were working in a basement, it would be smoking rubble everywhere. That's what I imagined in my head, but it was just nothing, because basically there was they called in the National Guard. I don't know if you remember that either, but that was the first day. And then we had to come back, obviously, because it went on for a long time. But the next day, they were like, okay, you're not going to work in the comm center, April. You're going to work at the mall. And I was 21 years old, and I was sitting next to this tank, and there were all these soldiers around me, and we were in the parking structure of the Long Beach Plaza, and it was so surreal. It was like I was in a war, because I was the only civilian, and there were all these soldiers around me with helmets on and an actual tank, with a gun. Everybody, all the soldiers had machine guns and stuff. And I was like, what is happening? I couldn't, I'm just a kid. I don't know what's going on. And I'm supposed to handle communications for these soldiers. I was like, it was completely bizarre. And then something even weirder happened. All these employees started coming out of the mall, and they were bringing us trays of Mrs. Fields cookies and Sbarro's pizza and hot dog on a stick. And it was so weird. It was just it was weird. It was just so much weirdness. And so I'm standing around with all these soldiers, and we're eating corn dogs and stuff, and nothing was really happening because you're not going to riot with, in front of a bunch of soldiers with guns, right? But after I started working for the police department, I became like a prepper. Do you know what a prepper is? I guess it's supposed to be like a derogatory term, but you start basically being ready for anything. So you have your like your canned goods and your tools, and like in your house you have toilet paper. You just get ready for anything, because if they shut down the city with soldiers again, like you can't go anywhere. So you just, obviously if you live in an apartment you can't really store stuff if you don't have a basement, but you get what you can and you're ready for anything. And people started to make fun of me because of that. Right? Like I remember my next job from when I was a dispatcher, my first regular job, I worked at Ralph's Grocery Company in the corporate office in HR. And in my little cubicle, I always like had like a little stock of water, and I had a flashlight, and little emergency things. And people would like see this and like laugh at me. And I'm like, one day something's gonna happen and you're gonna come straight to me. Watch. And sure enough, one day all the power went out in the building. All the power went out. Like we couldn't see in front of us. And this was before everybody had like a smartphone with a flashlight. So the only lights in and there were no windows because we're in like this giant warehouse building, but the only lights were like these little exit signs all over the place. And everyone came straight to me. April has a flashlight. April has this. April. I was like, ha! You made fun of me before, right? Now y'all come crying to me. But yeah, I had to lead everybody out because I was the only one who had a flashlight. But yeah, like, because you witness stuff. Like, things can happen, and they can happen fast. And honestly, once the power goes out, like, you have no idea. Like, everything is reliant on power. Like, you can't get money because the ATMs run on electricity, right? You've got to be prepared. So, and sometimes, like, when the riots happen, you could call 911 all day long and the police aren't going to show up. So you have to have something. You have to be able to help yourself to a certain degree because the police aren't always going to come. One of the calls we get a lot is, it's called a check the well. Basically, like, let's say you live in Boston, right? But your mom lives in Long Beach. And you keep calling her. She doesn't answer her phone. She's not answering her email. So you call the police and say, could you check on my mom? Because, like, I haven't heard from her for a couple of days. And she always emails me, or she usually answers my calls, whatever. And so we go, okay. And usually 9 times out of 10, they just lost their phone or something. And they go, just call your son. He's worried about you. Okay. Anyway, this time the officers get out there. He and his partner go out to this house. And again, it was a check the well. The daughter was worried about her father, who is elderly. And I think it was like a month that she hadn't heard from him in a month. So they get out there and they knock on the door. And he doesn't answer the phone or answer the door. And he's not answering his phone, obviously. And they look inside, and the power was out. And I think he hadn't paid his bill in a while, and I think the power went out. But anyways, they looked in there and they couldn't see anything. So they get permission to force the door, right? And the daughter's like, yeah, force the door, find out if my dad's okay. So they break the door down, or they force it open. And they're standing in this house, and it's dead quiet, right? Except they could hear, I remember the officer telling me, he said, it sounded like, when you're making hamburgers and you're like mixing the meat with the spices and stuff, and it's like that wet noise, like, you know what I'm talking about? Like you're massaging meat. And he's like, it was that sound. And, and it's spelled horrible also, but they get their flashlights out and they look around, and the father is dead, and the sound is the maggots eating his body. And I was like, ew, ew. That's why I can't be a police officer. But yeah, see, like, who can see that stuff every day and be sane, right? Like, they call it cop humor, but that's how you deal with stuff. And dispatchers do it too, because you either laugh or you cry, right? If you hear something, so you have to make jokes about everything. But yeah, that's Every time I make hamburgers, I think about that story. Yeah, there was a time when I was dispatching and the officer came on the air, and usually you could tell if something is wrong just by the tone of their voice, right? If they're not screaming. But this officer is like, one boy six, go ahead. And he's like, there's a hesitation in his voice. Code 6 out here on Long Beach Boulevard and, Pine Avenue, whatever. And but he didn't say what he had, right? And I was like, do you need a unit, 1.6? And he's like, you better get fire out here. And fire means, paramedics. And I was like, 10-4, why? Because back then, the fire department in Long Beach anyway, I don't know if it's like this in every agency, but they won't go anywhere without a police unit, right? Because they're, oh, it's a code 9 location for us, which means like they had trouble there before. But everywhere in Long Beach is code 9 for the fire department, right? So they always want a unit. However, if we ask for them, they want to know every little detail before they come and help us, right? So I'm asking the officer before I even send the request. I'm like, tell me more. Like, I got to give fire more information. So he's all, there's this guy and he has something coming out of his neck, and it looks like maggots. And I was all 10-9, like what? And yeah, so the officer, just you could hear like the disgust in his voice, but the guy that he's like talking to was like, I guess he was a street person, and he had like some sort of sore on his neck, and like maggots were spilling out. So send the request for the fire department, and every officer or every police unit has we call them KDTs, keyboard data terminals, but it's basically a laptop computer that's bolted to the dashboard. If you look in any officer's car, you can see it. But they could do almost everything by themselves. Like they could put themselves out for investigation. Usually they'd like to do it on their radio, but sometimes there's so much traffic, it's just faster if they do it themselves. But I noticed like 10 units jump on the call. They put themselves to assist him because they all want to see the maggots coming out of this guy's neck. But yeah, that was kind of funny. Maybe not to you, but it was funny to me. Oh, let me tell you about a ride-along I went on. So one of the things that I didn't want to go, but it was mandatory, was they made me go on ride-alongs, which meant I had to get in a police unit with some officers and like follow them around all day to see what they do and stuff. And I was like, I know they have a dangerous job, and you want me to get in this, this vehicle with no vest on or anything and like hang out with cops without a gun? Like, I don't want to do that. But I had to go. So anyways, I was with this rookie cop. Well, he wasn't a rookie because he didn't have a partner. So he was trained and everything. But he was around my age. And I was like 19 at the time. I think he was like 21. But anyway, so we're driving around and I did not want to be there. And every time he wanted to do something, I'm like, I'll wait in the car. But anyway, he was like, no, you have to be with me because I can't watch you if. So I was like, oh, whatever. So anyways, a detective comes on the air and he's like, yeah, can I have a unit and an assist? And he gives this address at like 10th and Orange, which is like one of the worst areas in Long Beach. So, the officer I was with was like, Boy 7, we're en route. So suddenly we're driving 80 miles an hour down this alley, and I'm like, God, please, I don't want to die today, please. And we're just flying down this thing, and he can't wait to get there. And so we stop, and he was like, he jumps out of the car. He's like, come on, April, let's go. And we're in this horrible, stinking alley behind, and it's like this garage with this little apartment at the top. And I was like, seriously, I'll wait here. And he was like, no, you got to come with me because I can't watch you. So he runs up the stairs and I follow him up. And we get into this tiny little room, and it has like a little tiny bathroom off the side. And there's like probably 15 Latino guys, and they're all handcuffed and they're all squatting against the wall, just so many of them. And there's a bunch of cops standing around in there. Most of them are detectives. And right at my feet is this giant box of money. It was like so much money. And how many people were in that room? Probably like 30 people, including me, in this tiny room. And I was like, I wonder if I could take some of that without anybody Like, I had never seen that much cash in my whole life. And it was just spilling out of this box. I was like, and then he was like, look in there. And I look in the bathroom, and it was like this horrible, disgusting, tiny little bathroom. And there was this giant, later I found out it was heroin. I didn't know what heroin looked like, but it was all this heroin, like packages of heroin. And someone had been trying to flush it all down the toilet. And it was so funny because there was so much of it. There must have been like 50 pounds of it. It would have taken like 3 days to flush all this stuff down the toilet. But somebody had been trying to do it. And I was like, wow. And there were guns everywhere. I was like, there's not enough money for me to be able to do that job. But yeah, that's one thing that I will never forget, was just like, you think you know yourself, right? You're like, oh, I don't steal. But that's the first thing that popped into my brain, was like, when I saw that money, I was like, they probably won't miss any of it, right? Like, that's a lot of money. Just like, But yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this.
Oh, you're welcome.